Hey folks, I'm Gene Delasalo with Audioholics, and today I would like to cover a pair of powered speakers, our first review of powered speakers in 2018. We promised we'd be covering more of these per our last CES video, and the competition's heating up. There's some great options out there in the market. Now the ones I'd like to cover today are from a brand called Edifier. Never heard of them before, and I had to do some research on them. Initially, they piqued my interest with their press release on their new S2000 Pros when they said they wanted to give everybody an audiophile experience. And of course, I'd love to have an audiophile experience, especially when it's not a costly audiophile experience. So this company, Edifier, they're from Beijing, China. They were started by a group of what they claim passionate audiophiles, and back in 1996, I believe. And today they have over 3,000 employees in a state-of-the-art facility, and they've sold over 8 million products worldwide. So they're getting some good grounds here. And if you look on Amazon, their products are all over Amazon, so you know they're getting some penetration in the United States. And they're a direct competitor for many of the big brands out there. You know, Swan is one that comes to mind. There's JBL, there's so many, Behringer. But very few of them, for $400 a pair, have all the sophistication and DSP horsepower that I'm seeing with these speakers. So I'd like to give you a rundown of what's inside these speakers. Let's start with driver topology and just in general what kind of design it is. So the Edifier S2000 Pros are a two-way rear-ported design. They have a 1-inch planar tweeter, which kind of looks to me like a ribbon, but it's also in a very clever waveguide, and that helps to control directivity, narrow the dispersion, just so it gives you good off-axis performance to match the directivity of the mid-range. So basically you get better integration between the mid-range and the tweeter. The woofer is very impressive as well. It looks like a treated paper cone when in fact it's not. It's a black aluminum anodized cone woofer. And it's a very rigid design. I ran some sweep tests on it. I didn't see any resonances or hear any resonances. They have a very good suspension. They did good dampening between the butyl rubber surround and whatever they did with the cone itself. It's a great design. It's got a very powerful motor structure. And the same thing with the tweeter. I was expecting when I pulled the tweeter out of the cabinet to see a little tiny neodymium magnet like you see in most budget designs. And no way, man. This thing had a really big ferrite motor structure. Very impressed with that. I didn't expect to see this kind of driver technology and this kind of attention to detail in a pair of speakers that are only $400. So on the driver side, very impressed. On the electronic side, it's even more impressive. Now, these don't have passive crossovers like you see in most speakers. Even a lot of powered speakers still have passive crossovers. Instead, they use fully active designs. And what the advantage of an active design, if done properly, is that you get to match the driver responses. You get to, to nullify any resonances that are in the drivers. You get to have custom slopes in the crossovers. So that way you get the best optimal blend between the woofer and the tweeter, and usually gives you better response measurement curves as well. And we did do some measurements on these speakers, and they did measure pretty well. And you can look at our written review to get more details about that. But the drivers are integrated with an active design, and the amplifiers, they are bi-amplified with a TI chipset at Class D, which are some of the best designs on the market for their budget and for their size. And the way that Edifier has done this is they are giving you 50 watts a channel for the mid-bass drivers and 12 watts a channel for the tweeters. So it's plenty of power, especially if you're using these as a desktop monitor. They put a lot of good technology in here as well with the analog and D to A and A to D converters from Burr Brown. They give you audiophile kind of DACs, if you will. So you could do 192 kilohertz 24-bit audio streams. The other cool thing is you could do wireless, and it has Bluetooth 4.0 with aptX. And the aptX is what gives you that near CD quality streaming. And I've done some tests on that, and I had some great results as well. But I wanted to show you all the connection options. I want to actually show you a speaker in hand and just give you a walk around. So I'm going to pick up this little guy. Pretty heavy, actually. I would guesstimate they weigh about 15 to 20 pounds each. And both speakers weigh the same, despite the fact that this one master speaker, which is the one I have in my hand with all the electronics on it, and then the slave speaker, which only has an input connector for interfacing with this speaker. They weigh about the same, and part of it is because of this cabinetry. This is a real wood veneer. These are real wood side panels. This is no cheap vinyl imitation. And the whole cabinet is very rigid. It's put together so extremely well. I think the front baffles are about 0.7 inches or close to that. And it's just, I guess I'm pretty blown away by a speaker that looks constructed so well, internally and externally. I'll start with the grill. I actually like the grill design. I think it looks really cool. These are one of the few speakers I think that look better with the grills on. Part of it is the aesthetics of the grill. I like the way it tapers off for the tweeter. But the other part, and this is a bit of a struggle to get these grills off. You can see they have a very tight mesh. That's important in order to minimize losses. It is a plastic frame, but it's pretty rigid, and the mesh itself is very tightly wound. It's a very fine mesh. The thing I didn't care too much for is the fact that they left the standoffs on the front baffle. To me, this would have looked a lot better if it was on the grill frame itself, or if they would have spent a little bit more and used neodymium slugs on the grill and on the baffle and made a magnetic grill. We've seen a lot of that lately with speakers, but that does add some cost, so it could be a cost savings measure why they didn't do that. Perhaps in a future iteration, if they're listening, they will change that. But anyways, you can see the woofer here, beautiful woofer and tweeter. I don't think I mentioned that there's a bullet here, a little bullet phase plug that actually helps minimize high frequency resonances. And I guess they also do some extra dispersion control in here as well. So it's a really cool design, as you can see. That's the front of the speaker. And then the back is where you have a lot of connection options that you don't always get in $400 active monitors. So you've got balanced inputs, unbalanced inputs, you've got a coax input for digital audio, and a Toslink input. And the Toslink input is what's really compelling to me, because this is what makes it stand out as an alternative to getting a $400 soundbar. You can plug this right into the Toslink output of your TV into here, and you can have much better sound than you're going to get from a crappy $400 soundbar. So the other thing it has is volume control on the back, bass and treble. Now these are analog controls, but they're actually digitally controlled through the DSP. I kind of wish that these controls were on the front panel like you see in some of the Swan models. Reason why I say that is the remote control does not duplicate the tone controls. So anytime you want to do any adjustments to bass and treble, you're going to have to go behind the speaker, which is a bit of a pain, especially if they're on a desktop or if they're not within arm's reach. So that's another thing I'd like to see maybe in a future model, to offer it either on the remote or put it on the front, on the bottom of the baffle. And of course, here's the rear port. It's flared to reduce any kind of port noises, which I never heard any port noises no matter how hard I drove these speakers. So it's a very well executed design. I'm going to put this down. A couple of things I don't like about the speakers before we get into the listening test is, if I can get this, this is their connection cable, which is all kind of bunched up and it's ridiculously long. I mean, I think the manual says it's like 16 feet, and that's about right. I think I measured 15 or 16 feet. Who in their right mind is going to put a pair of speakers like these 15 or 16 feet apart? It's just very unlikely. I really wish Edifier would either offer a smaller cable, a shorter cable, like 10 feet, or give us a 5-foot option. Because let's face it, the majority of people using these speakers are going to put them in as a near-field monitor on a desk. And like in my situation, I've got a pair of near-field monitors here that are 5 or 6 feet away from each other. So this cable can be a real nuisance. And I hope that they change that in future iterations. It's also really thick, so it just makes it really hard to kind of conceal. The other thing I'm not too thrilled about is this remote control. Now let me tell you guys, if you are ever in a situation in your house where someone's breaking in, forget about the baseball bat. Just grab this guy. This remote is lethal. It's oversized. It's as big or close to the size of my remote in my 11-channel Atmos processor. But these sharp edges, you hit someone in the head with this and you're going to give them a bad day. Their hairline's just not going to look right after that. I don't understand the ergonomics of this remote and the shape of it. It's just cumbersome. There's really no need to have such a large remote. All this does is control your input source, power, mute, volume up and down 4 EQ settings, and a back, forward, and pause if you're using Bluetooth. This could have been done in like a pocket-sized remote, even something like the size of my little business card holder here. No reason to have a ridiculously oversized remote like this. I hope Edifier will change that in the future. The other thing that I'm not thrilled about, and I've noticed some of the other competitors to them at $400 a pair have the same shortcoming, there's no subwoofer output on these speakers. That's a real oversight. It doesn't cost much to add a subwoofer output to give people the ability to add bass extension to their system. Don't understand why that was omitted. The user manual is pretty lame. There's not a whole lot of information in here. In fact, when I was learning about the EQ settings, I'm sitting there pressing all the different EQ buttons and I'm not hearing any difference at all. I'm thinking there's something wrong with it. Well, I found out through trial and error that the EQ settings do not affect the balanced inputs. They affect every other input but balanced, not a fact mentioned in this user manual, which is mostly a paperweight. Really got to get down and just play with the speaker yourself and watch this video for any tips that I might unveil to you. So anyways, not thrilled about the remote. So I wanted to go over with you about the EQ settings. The various settings, there's 4. There's monitor, which is flat. There's dynamic, which gives you a boost in bass and treble. There's classic, which gives you a boost mostly in the highs. And then there's vocal that gives you a boost in the mids and highs. In most scenarios, I use monitor. But when I put on stuff like Muse, high energy music, or Depeche Mode, that kind of music, I did enjoy the dynamic mode because it gave you that boost in the bass and treble. Sometimes it was too much though. Like I said, these speakers already have a little bit of a forward sound. So in most cases, I would tell you to use monitor. And if you find that these speakers are a little too forward and you want to reduce that a little bit, you can knock the treble down a dB behind the speaker and maybe turn the bass up a notch, and you should be good to go. These speakers sound great right out of the gate. These EQ settings, I mean, depending on the quality of the source, you might want to play with them or not, but I would say in most cases use it on flat or monitor position. So let me tell you about the listening scenarios I put these Edifier S2000 Pros in. I ran them in 3 situations. The first scenario, I put them in my theater room, which is a 6,000 foot room, the Audioholics showcase room, put them on 30-inch stands. I stream music from my LG G6 phone, which has aptX. I also connected it to my Marantz PM11S3 integrated amp, and I streamed the same kind of music from my hard drive through my Apple player into the Marantz to the Edifier speakers. So I compared the Bluetooth versus an actual analog connection. So that was scenario 1. Scenario 2, I put them in my office and I ran them as a near field monitor next to my RBH41 SEBs. So I listened to them via Bluetooth, and then I also connected them through my computer using my headphone preamp and DAC. So I bypassed the sound card in my computer, and I did the same kind of music files there as well. And then the third scenario, which is really the scenario I was most interested in for these speakers, was to connect them to my Roland drum kit. I recently had a pair of Swan T200C speakers kind of fault on me. The power supply went bad and they're humming, and it wasn't something that was worth fixing. Loved those speakers, but I couldn't handle the hum, so I was looking for a replacement, something close or equal to performance. So that's why I wanted to see how these speakers would do in that scenario. So to go back to the first scenario in the theater room, I started out listening to some jazz music. I used Kurt Elling. I used a track called Night Moves, which is an old Michael Frank song. And I was immediately impressed by the full range sound I was hearing from these speakers. I just didn't expect that. I know that there's some good bass in this track, and I was hearing a good representation through these speakers, better than I thought I would. Of course, it's not full range like my large towers with subs, but it was a good approximation. The bass that was coming out was articulate and clean and very tight. But what really captivated me on these speakers was the very open and airy sound from the high end. There was just so much detail coming out of the tweeters, and his voice, Kurt's voice, was excellent. It was very pinpoint. The overall balance of the sound was pretty neutral. I would say that it was a tad bright, a little bit forward. The sound stage was a little forward. Like, these speakers are a little blunt. They're in your face. They're not laid back like you would hear on other speakers with maybe a Silk Dome tweeter and a paper cone woofer. They were definitely more in your face, which is not a bad thing. It all depends on what you like. The soundstage wasn't extremely deep like I've heard on more expensive speakers, but it was there. Everything was well placed. There was a lot of spaciousness and a lot of detail that was coming out of it. Then I pumped things up and I put on Muse Second Law, and I put on the track Madness. And again, I'm streaming through my phone, and I cranked it all the way up. I even cranked the bass up a little bit, and I could not get these speakers to bottom out. I couldn't get them to misbehave. They didn't get super loud in my theater room, unfortunately, because it's a huge room. They were comfortably loud, but I wouldn't say they filled the room with sound. But when I switched over to my Marantz integrated amp and ran the same test, my Marantz put out a lot more output voltage into these speakers. So it drove them to the point where the preamp inside the speakers started clipping. But before it did that, I did get more volume out of them than I could through Bluetooth on my phone. But at some point, it was cranking it too loud. You could start hearing some preamplifier clipping. But I think that's an outlier. I don't think most people would have this kind of problem when they're using these in real world, especially as a desktop monitor. But I was pretty amazed at how close the Bluetooth streaming with the 4.0 aptX in sound quality was to doing an analog connection. I mean, we're getting pretty close. Bluetooth has come a long way, and I would say this is a viable option for most people, even critical listeners. If you've got good source files on your phone and you want to stream Bluetooth to your speakers, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. So I enjoyed that listening session. I did realize the limitations, the bass limitations and total output in a large room. These are not designed for a large room. These are designed for an office or for a den or for a little studio. You're not going to put these in a giant room. Let's just be realistic on what the speakers are. So in my desktop, that was another story. I ran these in my small desk in my office, and I immediately noticed that these speakers sounded much larger than my RBHs. My RBHs only have a 4-inch woofer and a 1-inch dome tweeter, so these clearly had the advantage in output. They were more bold sounding. They were a little bit more detailed, whereas my RBHs were a little bit more laid back and smooth. I like the sound of both speakers. I'm not faulting the RBHs, but the RBHs with a sub are a lethal combination because I have a Velodyne Mini V, which is a 10-inch or an 8-inch driver. Forgot what it was, but it's a very capable small sub. So when you have a satellite speaker with a sub, that's a lethal combo. That's not something you could do with these speakers, unfortunately, because there's no sub out. It's not an easy way to connect to a subwoofer. But for most people that are not bassaholics like me, these will give you a very satisfying sound. When I replayed the same kind of music, I played Muse, I played Kurt Elling, I played various tracks from all different artists, jazz music. It was a very satisfying listening experience. I noticed the same kind of thing where the sound was a little bit more forward than I was used to with my RBHs, but the sound stage was very tall and wide, and it was very enjoyable. So it felt like a live experience. I spent some time listening to this SACD from a woman called Clara, C-H-L-A-R-A, I believe. I don't know where I got this SACD, but it's a very high fidelity, and she basically does remakes of popular songs, like songs from Adele, the Eagles, just a bunch of different artists. It's a beautiful sounding SACD. If you have SACD capability, check this SACD out. Her voice, she's got the voice of an angel, and these speakers did a great job of conveying that. I really enjoyed listening to Hotel California in particular. Again, it showed off these speakers' ability to produce very tight bass. Wasn't super deep, but it was tight and clean. The highs were also awesome. Just hearing the kind of guitars going back and forth between the left and right channels was very impressive. It was a very enjoyable experience listening to the entire SACD with these speakers. I can't fault the sound of these speakers. For $400 a pair, I can't stress to you how good these things are, how far we've come in the last few years in active monitors. It's really a no-brainer when you think about what you're getting both in performance-wise and aesthetics-wise and feature-wise for a relatively affordable price. So now the last scenario I wanted to talk about was when I brought these in, put them on the floor, and played them with my Roland TV6 or TD6, whatever the model number is, the Roland drum kit that I have. And I just went to town on them. Now, I will tell you the first thing I did when I got these speakers, I actually listened to them on the drum machine, never listened to them with music. Initially, I felt like they lacked bass. Like I felt like compared to my Swans, I didn't go as deep, but I noticed immediately that the highs were much more refined, much more detailed. And then over the course of 3 or 4 days, I think, you know, just playing them nonstop, the drivers kind of broke in a little bit, the bass drivers, and then I turned the bass treble control up a little bit. I started narrowing that gap of what I felt the missing bass kind of came back. I wouldn't say they dug as deeply as the Swans, but it was pretty satisfying. I really enjoy these speakers on my Roland drum kit. They play very cleanly. They never misbehave. There's no humming. There's no clipping. And they're a great little speaker if you have a small drum set in an office or something and you don't want to disturb a lot of people. They work in that environment equally as well as they did on my desktop as an audiophile solution. So guys, all three scenarios, I would say the best way to use these speakers is in an office or small room or as a near field. You can't go wrong with it. For those that are contemplating using a soundbar, please don't. I mean, please, if you have the space to put a soundbar, I'm sure you could find an area on the sides of your TVs where you could put one speaker on each side for $400. If you listen to more music than you do watch movies, you're going to really appreciate having this alternative to what you can get for most $400 solutions on the market for soundbars. Just much higher quality, fidelity, no brainer. This company seems like they're really serious about producing good quality solutions for audiophiles that are on a budget. And I have to tell you that their slogan of giving everybody an audiophile experience, it kind of lived up to what they were trying to convey in their press release. I'm a believer, and I think if you get a pair of these in for review or to demo yourself, you'll be a believer too. So guys, let us know what you're using for active speakers, if you're even considering active speakers. Let me know what you'd like to see us cover in the next video or in the next round of active speakers. We're going to be looking at more of these kind of solutions in the near future. Thumb up the video, share it if you like it, and until next time, keep listening.